The acrid smell of spilled beer mixed with the sharp tang of citrus from freshly cut limes burned my nostrils as I swiped the damp cloth across the bar's scratched wooden surface for what felt like the 100th time that shift. My lower back throbbed with that specific kind of ache that comes from 6 hours on your feet in shoes that were supposed to be supportive, but had given up that promise somewhere around month 3. The Thursday evening crowd at Kanemoto's was in full swing, a cacophony of laughter, clinking glasses, and the low hum of conversations that never quite stayed low enough in a place like this. Kanemoto's wasn't the kind of bar you stumbled into by accident. Tucked into a side street in Lower Manhattan, it catered to a specific clientele: Japanese businessmen, expats, and the occasional brave soul who wandered in hoping for authentic izakaya-style drinks and small plates. The interior was all dark wood and paper lanterns, with kanji characters painted on the walls in calligraphy that I'd spent weeks trying to decipher when I first started working here. The menu was printed in both Japanese and English, though most regulars never bothered with the English side. I'd been working at Kanemoto's for 8 months now, ever since I dropped out of my second year at NYU when the money ran out. The plan had been simple: work full-time, save aggressively, reapply for financial aid, maybe get back to school in a year or 2. The reality was more complicated. Rent in Queens ate most of my paycheck. The rest went to food, utilities, and the monthly subscription to 3 different Japanese learning apps that I told myself were investments in my future, not luxuries I couldn't afford. Learning Japanese had started as a distraction, something to occupy my mind during the subway commute to and from my cramped studio apartment. But it had become an obsession, a lifeline to a version of myself that felt less stuck. I devoured grammar patterns the way some people binged Netflix series. I muttered vocabulary lists under my breath while restocking beer bottles. I dreamed in broken sentences that mixed English and Japanese until I woke up confused about which language I was actually supposed to be thinking in. "Lena, Table 7 needs water refills, and the Sato party just arrived. VIP section." Mariko's voice cut through my mental fog. She was the floor manager, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who ran Kanemoto's with military precision. Her eyes flickered to my hands, still mechanically wiping the already clean bar. "And stop obsessing over that spot. The wood's been stained for years. You're not going to scrub it away." I nodded, setting down the cloth and grabbing a water pitcher. My fingers trembled slightly as I gripped the handle. I'd been doing that a lot lately, the trembling. Stress, probably. Or exhaustion, or the weight of knowing that at 23, I was supposed to have my life more figured out than this. The VIP section was separated from the main floor by a decorative screen made of dark wood and frosted glass. It was where the important people sat, the ones who made reservations weeks in advance, the ones whose bills sometimes reached 4 figures for a single evening. I'd served in there a handful of times, always hyper-aware of my movements, my words, the way my worn black slacks and white button-down looked shabby compared to the designer suits and silk dresses of the clientele. Table 7 was easy. A couple of businessmen barely glanced up as I refilled their glasses, murmuring arigato in accents that marked them as Kansai natives. I'd learned to distinguish regional Japanese accents from the podcasts I listened to obsessively, the same way a musician might learn to identify instruments in a complex orchestral piece. But it was the Sato party that made my stomach clench with something that wasn't quite nervousness, wasn't quite anticipation. Mariko had mentioned them with a particular tone, the one she reserved for guests who required absolute perfection. I pushed through the screen into the VIP section, the atmosphere immediately different. The lighting was softer here, the sounds from the main floor muted, and seated at the corner table, the best one in the section, were 3 men. 2 of them I barely registered, generic in their expensive suits, their postures relaxed in the way of people accustomed to being served. But the third man made the air in the room feel different. He sat at the head of the table, his posture so perfectly straight it looked uncomfortable, except something told me this was natural for him. His suit was charcoal gray, probably Italian, Definitely worth more than 6 months of my rent. But it wasn't the suit that caught my attention. It was the way he wore it. The way the fabric draped across shoulders that were broad and muscular, in a way that suggested he didn't just sit behind desks. His hair was black, cut short on the sides and swept back from his face in that effortless way that probably took 20 minutes and expensive product to achieve. His features were sharp, almost severe. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes that were dark and unreadable as they scanned the menu in front of him. Those eyes flicked up as I approached, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. It was assessing, calculating, taking in every detail of my appearance in the span of a heartbeat. I'd been looked at before, by customers, by men on the subway, by my ex-boyfriend before he decided a struggling college dropout wasn't worth his time. But this was different. This felt like being read, like every insecurity and ambition I carried was suddenly visible on my skin. "Good evening," I managed, my voice professionally pleasant despite the way my pulse had kicked up. "Can I start you with drinks?" One of the other men spoke, ordering in rapid Japanese that I caught maybe 70% of. Something about whiskey, ice, specific brands I'd need to confirm with Mariko. I nodded, scribbling notes, hyper-aware of the third man's continued silence, his continued observation. When his companions finished ordering, he spoke for the first time. "Yamazaki 18. Neat." His voice was low, controlled, with an accent that was distinctly American but carried Japanese pronunciation with native precision. Each word was deliberate, measured, as if speech itself required the same discipline as everything else about him. "Of course," I replied, grateful my voice didn't shake. "I'll have those right out." I made it 3 steps toward the screen before I heard it. A sharp exhalation, the kind that in Japanese culture signaled impatience or disapproval without words. I froze, my server instinct screaming that I'd done something wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. "The Yamazaki 18 is top shelf, behind the bar." His voice again, still quiet, but with an edge that made it a correction rather than a suggestion. "Not in the storage room." Heat flooded my face. He was right. Tommy, the new bartender, had mentioned something about reorganizing the top shelf bottles that morning, moving some to the main bar for easier access. I'd forgotten. In my exhaustion, in my attempt to move efficiently, I'd been about to walk in the wrong direction. "My apologies," I said, turning back with what I hoped was a professional smile. "I'll have those out immediately." Another sharp exhalation. Softer this time. Almost thoughtful. I escaped through the screen, my hands shaking harder now as I approached the bar. Tommy was mixing something complicated for table 12, his movements showing off in that way that marked him as someone who'd watched too many cocktail competition videos. "I need 3 whiskeys," I said, my voice tight. 2 Hibiki Harmony, 1 Yamazaki 18, now. He glanced up, taking in my expression. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "VIP section, the Sato party." Understanding dawned on his face. Even Tommy, who'd only been working here for 2 weeks, had heard about the Sato reservations. They came irregularly, maybe once every few months, but when they did, Mariko's stress levels visibly spiked. "That's the Sakamura group," he said quietly, pulling down the bottles with practiced efficiency. "Sato is probably their legal representation or something, but the guy you're really serving? That's Kaido Sakamura." The name meant nothing to me, but Tommy's tone suggested it should. "Should I know who that is?" He looked at me like I'd asked if the sky was blue. "You really don't pay attention to anything outside your language apps, do you? Sakamura family, Japanese American. They own half the commercial real estate in this neighborhood, plus stakes in restaurants, shipping companies, allegedly some less legal enterprises." He lowered his voice even further. "Yakuza connections, old school ones. The kind where family honor and business are the same thing." My stomach dropped. I'd just served drinks to a Yakuza heir, or near enough to one that the distinction didn't matter. "Don't look so terrified," Tommy said, arranging the glasses on a tray with garnishes I hadn't asked for but appreciated. "Just be professional. Don't stare. Don't ask questions. He tips well if you don't annoy him." I picked up the tray, my hand steadier now that I knew what I was dealing with. Knowledge was control. Understanding was power. I repeated the words like a mantra as I walked back to the VIP section. The three men were deep in conversation when I returned, their voices low and rapid in Japanese that was too fast, too colloquial for me to fully follow. I caught fragments, something about contracts, about timing, about someone named Takeda who'd caused problems. I set down the drinks with practiced efficiency, placing each glass in front of its owner without interrupting their flow. I was reaching for the Yamazaki 18, about to set it before Kaito Sakamura, when one of his companions laughed at something and gestured widely, his hand bumping my elbow. The glass tilted, and for one horrible moment, I thought I was going to spill 18-year-old Japanese whiskey all over a Yakuza heir's custom suit. I caught it, barely. The liquid sloshed but didn't spill, and I steadied the glass with both hands before setting it down with more force than intended. It made a sharp sound against the wooden table, loud enough that all three men stopped talking and looked at me. "Kuso," I muttered under my breath, the curse slipping out before I could stop it. Shit. The most basic, vulgar, pedestrian Japanese curse word, one of the first I'd learned because of course it was. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Kaito Sakamura's head tilted, just slightly, his dark eyes fixing on me with an intensity that made my throat go dry. When he spoke, his voice was even quieter than before, which somehow made it more commanding. "Nante ita. What did you say?" My brain short-circuited between panic and the automatic translation reflex. He was asking what I'd said. He'd heard me. Of course he'd heard me. I'd just cursed in Japanese in front of a native speaker, in front of a man who probably had people disappeared for lesser offenses. Nothing. I apologize. The glass almost... No. His eyes never left mine. "You said something. In Japanese." He leaned back slightly in his chair, his posture relaxing in a way that was more predatory than casual. "Say it again. Properly." One of his companions shifted uncomfortably. The other had gone very still, watching the exchange with the kind of attention that suggested this was unusual, that their boss didn't normally engage with servers this way. "I really should. Properly," he repeated, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request despite the grammatical structure. His lips curved, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of amusement. "Your pronunciation was off. The U in Kuso should be shorter. Almost silent. Try again." Heat flooded my face for an entirely different reason now. He wasn't angry. He was testing me. Worse, he was teaching me. "Kuso," I whispered, shortening the U the way he'd instructed, feeling absurd and exposed and somehow more visible than I'd been in months. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but close. Recognition, maybe. "Better. Where did you learn Japanese?" The question was so unexpected that I answered honestly. "Apps, textbooks from the library, podcasts." I gestured vaguely, aware of his companions listening. "I'm self-taught." Why? Direct, demanding. As if my motivations were his business simply because he'd decided they were. I should have deflected. Should have given some generic answer about travel plans or cultural interest. But standing there under his gaze, I found myself telling a version of the truth. I want to study abroad, in Japan. There's a scholarship program, but it requires N2 level proficiency, and I can't afford formal classes, so I'm trying to teach myself, but it's slow, and I'm probably making 100 mistakes with every sentence, and I cut myself off, realizing I was babbling to a customer, to a dangerous customer, spilling my inadequacies like they were his concern. Kaido Sakamura studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up his whiskey, took a measured sip, and set it down with deliberate precision. "You used Kuso incorrectly," he said, his tone conversational now, almost casual. "It's too harsh for the situation. For a near accident, you'd use yabai or abunai. Kuso is for when something's already gone wrong beyond repair." He paused. "Context matters in Japanese more than grammar. Apps won't teach you that." I stared at him, uncertain if I'd just been corrected or helped or both. "Your shift ends at what time?" he asked. 11, I answered automatically, then immediately regretted it. Why had I told him that? Why was I still standing here? He nodded, dismissing me with nothing more than a shift in his attention back to his companions. I stood there for one more frozen second before my survival instincts kicked in, and I fled back to the main floor, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Mariko caught me near the bar, her expression concerned. "What happened in there?" "I cursed in Japanese in front of Kaido Sakamura," I said flatly, and then he corrected my pronunciation. Her eyes widened. "He spoke to you?" "No. He asked where I learned Japanese, then told me I used the wrong curse word for the situation." I laughed, the sound slightly unhinged. "I think I just got a language lesson from a Yakuza heir." Mariko's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for me to track. Finally, she settled on something that looked like resignation mixed with warning. "Lena," she said carefully, "the Sakamura family doesn't engage with people casually. If Kaido spoke to you, it's because he found something interesting. And when men like him find things interesting, those things tend to become complicated very quickly." I thought about his eyes on mine, the weight of his attention, the casual way he'd commanded me to speak. What should I do? "Your job. Be professional. Don't assume this means anything." She squeezed my shoulder, her grip firm. "And whatever you do, don't let yourself think he's anything other than what he is." But as I returned to my routine, refilling waters, clearing tables, avoiding the VIP section for the rest of the shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. That in the span of one dropped curse word and a 3-minute conversation, I'd stumbled into something I didn't understand. And when I finally left at 11:15, exhausted and ready to collapse on my subway ride home, I found a black town car idling outside Kanemoto's back entrance. The driver, a Japanese man in his 40s with the bearing of someone who'd seen violence and committed it, rolled down his window as I approached. "Miss Carter," he said in accented English, "Mr. Sakamura asks that you accept a ride home. He insists the subway is not safe at this hour." I should have refused. Should have walked past the car and down to the subway station like I did every night. Instead, I thought about Kaido Sakamura's eyes, his quiet corrections, the way he'd made a single curse word feel like the beginning of something I couldn't name. "Tell Mr. Sakamura," I said slowly, "that I appreciate his concern, but I can take care of myself." The driver's expression didn't change. "He said you would say that. He also said to tell you that your pronunciation of arigato needs work. The O at the end should be longer, more sustained. He'll explain tomorrow." Tomorrow. As if my appearing tomorrow was inevitable. As if I'd already agreed to something I didn't remember agreeing to. I looked at the car, at the driver's patient expression, at the open door that promised warmth and safety, and 1,000 complications I didn't need. "I'll take the subway," I said finally, walking past the car with my head high and my heart hammering. Behind me, I heard the driver speak softly into a phone in Japanese. I caught only fragments, but one word was crystal clear. Interesting, I made it 3 blocks before I realized he was right. I did pronounce arigato wrong. The final O was too short, too clipped. and I hated that he'd been right. Hated it almost as much as I hated the small, traitorous part of me that wanted to know what he would have said tomorrow. Friday evening arrived with the inevitability of a storm I'd watched building on the horizon. I spent the entire subway ride to work, mentally rehearsing what I'd say if Kaito Sakamura appeared at the bar again, which was ridiculous, because there was no reason to assume he would. Men like him didn't have routines that included the same bar 2 nights in a row. They had empires to run, illegal enterprises to manage, probably a rotation of establishments where they held court. Except when I arrived at Kanemoto's, Mariko pulled me aside before I could even tie on my apron. "VIP section tonight," she said, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp with meaning. "The Sakamura table has a standing reservation for the next 2 weeks. Every night, 6 o'clock. My stomach flipped. Every night? Kaito Sakamura doesn't make requests. He makes arrangements. Mariko handed me a small leather portfolio I'd never seen before. "This is the service protocol for his table. Memorize it." I flipped open the portfolio to find detailed instructions written in both English and Japanese. Preferred seating arrangement. Drink specifications down to ice size and glass temperature. A list of topics that were never to be mentioned in his presence. A note at the bottom, handwritten in precise kanji. "The server from Thursday is to be assigned to this table exclusively. No exceptions." He asked for me specifically? The words came out higher than I intended. Mariko's expression softened slightly. "I told you. When they find something interesting, it becomes complicated." She hesitated, then added, "There's also this." She handed me an envelope, heavy cream paper with my name written in English letters but with a Japanese attention to calligraphy. I opened it to find a note in precise handwriting. "Your shift ends at 11. My driver will wait until 11:30. The subway is not a request you can refuse indefinitely. We have things to discuss. Specifically, your inadequate grasp of casual versus formal speech registers, and why your textbooks have failed you. No signature. None needed." "He can't just..." I started. "He can," Mariko interrupted. "And he has. The question is what you're going to do about it." I spent the next 2 hours in a strange fog of anticipation and dread, going through my normal prep routine while my mind spun in circles. At 5:45, I retreated to the bathroom to check my appearance. My blonde hair was pulled back in its usual practical ponytail, a few strands already escaping around my face. My uniform was clean, but worn, the white button-down showing the faint outline of a camisole underneath. I looked exactly like what I was, a 23-year-old woman working a job that barely covered rent, existing in a constant state of tired. Nothing about me should have registered to someone like Kaito Sakamura. We existed in different stratospheres of reality. At precisely 6 o'clock he arrived. Not alone this time. He was accompanied by a woman, Japanese, probably late 20s, devastatingly beautiful in that effortless way that suggested professional makeup artists and personal shoppers. Her black dress probably cost more than my monthly rent, and she moved with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned her place in any room. She laughed at something Kaito said as they walked toward the VIP section, her hand resting lightly on his arm in a gesture of familiar possession. Something twisted in my chest that I refused to name as disappointment. I gave them 5 minutes to settle before approaching with menus and water. The woman, Yuki, I learned from their conversation, barely acknowledged my presence beyond a dismissive glance. But Kaito's eyes found mine immediately, holding my gaze for a beat longer than necessary. "Good evening," I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral. "Can I start you with drinks?" "Yamazaki 18, Kaito said, his tone giving nothing away. "And Yuki will have the Haku vodka martini, dirty, with a twist." I noted the orders, hyper-aware of Yuki's attention now fixed on me with new interest. "You're the one he told me about," she said in English, her accent minimal but present. "The server who swears in Japanese." Heat crept up my neck. That was an accident. Accidents reveal truth. Yuki's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Kaito says you're self-taught. That's ambitious, or naive." She tilted her head, assessing. Probably both. Yuki, Kaido said quietly, a warning in his tone. She laughed, waving a dismissive hand. I'm just making conversation. It's not every day you take an interest in the help. The casual cruelty of it landed like a slap. I kept my expression neutral. Years of service work teaching me how to absorb insults without reaction. I'll have those drinks right out. I made it halfway to the bar, before I heard Kaido speak again, his voice low but carrying. That was unnecessary. Was it? Yuki's response was pitched to Carrie as well. You asked me here to discuss the Nagasaki contracts, but you've been distracted since we arrived. I'm simply identifying the distraction. Their conversation faded as I pushed through to the bar area, my hands trembling slightly as I relayed the drink order to Tommy. He raised his eyebrows at my expression but said nothing, mixing the drinks with efficient speed. When I returned to their table, the atmosphere had shifted. Yuki was scrolling through her phone, her posture suggesting boredom. Kaido was reviewing papers spread across the table, his attention completely absorbed. I set down the drinks, expecting to be dismissed. Wait, Kaido said without looking up. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket and wrote something quickly before tearing out the page and holding it toward me. Homework. I took the paper automatically, glancing down to see several Japanese sentences written in that same precise handwriting. Beside each was a note in English explaining the grammatical structure, the contextual usage, the common mistakes. I don't understand, I said. You want to pass the N2 exam? He finally looked up, his expression unreadable. The apps you're using won't get you there. These sentences contain grammar patterns that appear frequently on the test. Study them. We'll discuss your understanding tomorrow. Yuki laughed, the sound sharp. You're tutoring her? Kaido, you don't have time for— My time is mine to allocate, he interrupted, his tone polite but final. The Nagasaki contracts can wait until after dinner. I stood frozen, holding the paper like it might burn me. This made no sense. None of this made sense. Why would a Yakuza heir spend time teaching Japanese to a struggling server? What did he want from me? I can't accept this, I said carefully. I mean, thank you, but I don't want to impose on your time or create any misunderstanding about what? His eyes held mine, challenging. My time is mine to spend. Your education is yours to pursue. If those things intersect, where's the misunderstanding? People might assume, let them. He returned his attention to his papers. Your shift ends at 11. My driver will be waiting. This isn't negotiable, Lena. The use of my first name sent a small shock through me. He'd researched me, knew my name beyond what was printed on a name tag. Why are you doing this? I asked, abandoning professionalism for genuine confusion. Kaido set down his pen, giving me his full attention in a way that made the rest of the room fade. Because competence deserves recognition. Because you're attempting something difficult alone when you don't have to be. And because— He paused, something almost like humor flickering in his eyes. Your butchering of my language is painful to witness. Consider this self-preservation. Yuki made a disgusted sound. This is ridiculous. I'm going to the restroom. When I return, perhaps we can actually discuss business? She swept away from the table, leaving me alone with Kaido. The silence stretched for a moment before he spoke again, his voice lower now. She's not wrong to be suspicious, he said. I don't typically involve myself with people outside my world. But you interest me, Lena. Not in the way Yuki assumes, or the way you're probably fearing. He leaned back in his chair. You're trying to build something for yourself through knowledge, through persistence. I respect that. The least I can do is ensure you're learning correctly. And what do you want in return? I asked, because men like him didn't give without expecting something back. For now, better pronunciation, proper particle usage, a conversation partner who understands the language well enough to be interesting. His lips curved slightly. If that changes, I'll tell you. It should have reassured me. It didn't. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal haze. I served their table, watched Yuki's increasingly irritated attempts to reclaim Kaito's attention, and felt the weight of his gaze every time I entered the VIP section. When their meal concluded, Yuki left in a sleek red sports car, her goodbye to Kaito perfunctory and cold. He remained, moving to the bar area where he sat nursing a second whiskey while the evening crowd thinned. At 11 all, I clocked out with trembling hands. The paper with his homework felt heavy in my apron pocket. Mariko caught my arm near the employee exit. "Are you taking the ride?" she asked quietly. "I don't know." "Lena." She squeezed my arm. "Whatever this is, be careful. Men like Kaito Sakamura don't do anything without reason. The fact that you can't see his reason yet doesn't mean it doesn't exist." I nodded, pulling on my jacket and stepping out into the November cold. The black town car was there, as promised. But this time, when the driver opened the door, I saw Kaito himself in the back seat, laptop open, completely at ease in the leather interior. "Get in," he said without looking up. "We're going to practice your listening comprehension. I have a conference call in Japanese in 20 minutes. You'll listen and summarize what you understood." "That's confidential business information," I protested, even as my feet carried me toward the car. "Nothing you'll understand is confidential. Everything you will understand is intentional." He finally looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Are you getting in? Or am I sending my driver to physically retrieve you from the sidewalk?" I got in. The interior smelled like leather, and that same subtle cologne I'd noticed the night before, something woody with hints of citrus. The divider between us and the driver rose silently, creating a private cocoon. Kaito handed me a set of headphones. "Listen," he instructed. "Don't try to translate every word. Listen for meaning, for context, for the shape of the conversation." The call began, rapid Japanese flowing through the headphones as Kaito spoke with someone named Tanaka about shipping schedules and container manifests. I caught maybe 30%, enough to understand they were discussing legitimate business, deliberate in what he'd chosen to let me hear. When the call ended, he looked at me expectantly. "Well?" "You're expecting a shipment next week?" I said slowly. "Something from Yokohama. There's a delay because of port inspections. But you have someone who can expedite the process. Tanaka is nervous about the cost, but you told him the cost is acceptable if it means staying on schedule." 95% correct, Kaito said, satisfaction in his voice. "The shipment is from Yokohama. Good. Your listening comprehension is better than your speaking." "How do you know my speaking needs work? You've heard me say maybe 15 words in Japanese." 14, he corrected. "And I know because of your vowel length, your pitch accent, the way you swallow certain consonants. You're learning from textbooks designed for reading comprehension, not conversation." He pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. "I'm sending you a link to better resources. Podcasts specifically designed for N2 level learners. Use them." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a message from an unknown number. A list of links, each with a brief description in English. "How did you get my number?" "I own part of the phone company," he said casually, as if that explained and justified everything. "Also, the building where you live." My blood went cold. "You've been checking up on me?" "I've been ensuring you're safe. There's a difference." He closed his laptop, giving me his full attention. "Lena, you live in a building with inadequate security in a neighborhood with increasing property crime. You walk home from the subway alone after midnight. You have no emergency contacts listed with your employer besides a cousin in Chicago you haven't spoken to in 6 months." He recited these facts with clinical precision. "These are things I know, because I make it my business to know. If that concerns you, it should. but it should also tell you something about how seriously I take anything I decide to protect. I didn't ask for your protection. No, he agreed. You asked for help learning Japanese. The protection is simply a practical side effect of the kind of man I am. The car pulled up outside my building, a rundown 6-story walk-up in Queens that looked even more depressing next to the luxury vehicle. Kaito glanced out the window, his expression unreadable. 7th floor, apartment 7C, he said. Your rent is 3 weeks overdue. Your landlord, Marcus Chen, has filed preliminary eviction paperwork. Horror and humiliation warred in my chest. How do you... The same way I know everything else. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, setting it on the seat between us. Consider this an advance payment for your services as my conversation partner. We'll meet twice weekly for structured lessons. This covers the first month. I stared at the envelope, not touching it. How much is in there? Enough to cover your rent, your overdue utility bills, and your subway fare to work. He paused. It's not charity, Lena. I'm paying for a service. You have knowledge I want. Authentic practice with someone learning the language seriously. That has value. This is insane. But my hand was already reaching for the envelope, fingers trembling. You're essentially paying me to learn from you. I'm paying you to be available when I want to practice explaining complex concepts in Japanese. You happen to benefit from the explanation. He opened the car door. My driver will see you to your apartment. Tomorrow, 6 o'clock. We'll begin with formal versus casual speech registers. I clutched the envelope, feeling the weight of cash inside. Kaito. Tomorrow, he repeated, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. I stumbled out of the car and into my building, my mind reeling. I didn't open the envelope until I was safely inside my tiny studio, door locked, lights on. Inside was exactly $3,000 in cash and a note in that same precise handwriting. This is a professional arrangement. If it becomes uncomfortable, tell me and we'll renegotiate terms. But don't insult both of us by pretending you don't need this as much as I find it useful. I sat on my second-hand couch, surrounded by Japanese textbooks and scattered vocabulary cards, and tried to understand what had just happened. Kaito Sakamura, heir to a Yakuza-connected empire, dangerous and powerful and operating in a world I couldn't begin to comprehend, had somehow decided I was worth his time, worth his protection, worth $3,000 for the privilege of teaching me his language. And the most terrifying part wasn't what he might want from me eventually. It was how much I wanted to say yes. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days like a live grenade. $3,000 in cash, more money than I'd seen at once since dropping out of school. Enough to pay Marcus Chen the back rent and buy me breathing room for the first time in months. Enough to make me feel simultaneously rescued and purchased. I didn't spend it immediately. Couldn't. Every time I reached for the money, I heard Yuki's voice in my head. It's not every day you take an interest in the help. The casual dismissiveness of it, the certainty that whatever Kaito's interest in me was, it couldn't possibly be genuine. But I showed up at Kenemoto's on Saturday at 5:30, my stomach in knots, and my textbook notes stuffed into my bag like armor. Kaito's table, I'd started thinking of it as his table, which was its own problem, was already prepared when I arrived. The leather portfolio Mariko had given me had been updated with new preferences, new specifications, small details that suggested someone was paying extremely close attention to patterns I didn't realize I was creating. He arrived at 6 precisely, alone this time, dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, this one charcoal with subtle navy pinstripes. His hair was damp, like he'd come straight from a shower, and I caught a hint of that cedar citrus scent as he passed me on his way to the VIP section. "Good evening, Lena," he said in Japanese, the syllables crisp and deliberately clear. "How are you this evening?" It took my brain a second to catch up, to switch into Japanese mode. "I'm well, thank you," I replied, hyper-conscious of my pronunciation. "And you?" Better now. He settled into his seat, gesturing for me to sit across from him. Before we order, we're going to have a conversation, entirely in Japanese. I'll speak slowly at about 70% of my normal pace. You'll respond using only what you know. No English fallbacks. When you don't understand something, you'll ask for clarification in Japanese. Understood? My heart hammered against my ribs. But I need to work. Mariko will... I've arranged coverage for your section, he interrupted, switching back to English. For the next 2 hours, your only job is to sit here and learn. After that, you return to your normal duties. His expression softened marginally. Unless this is uncomfortable for you. In which case, I'll leave, and this ends now. I should have said yes. Should have taken the out he was offering and gone back to my normal life of struggling in comfortable obscurity. Instead, I heard myself say, "What do you want me to call you?" In Japanese, I mean. The formal casual thing is, Kaido is fine when we're alone. Sakamura-san when we're not. He pulled out a leather-bound notebook and set it on the table between us. We'll start with introductions. Tell me about yourself. In Japanese. 3 sentences minimum. Begin. What followed was the most excruciating, exhilarating 2 hours of my life. Kaido listened with absolute attention as I fumbled through sentences about my education, my job, my reasons for learning Japanese. He corrected my particle usage with surgical precision, explained the difference between WA and GA for the 15th time, until something finally clicked in my brain. He made me repeat phrases until my mouth learned the shape of sounds it had been pronouncing wrong for months. And slowly, somehow, it stopped being terrifying and started being addictive. You're thinking in English and translating, he said about an hour in, switching to English to make the point. Stop that. When I ask you a question in Japanese, your brain should reach for Japanese first. It's slower at first, but it's the only way to gain fluency. How do I stop translating? My brain doesn't work that way. Immersion, forcing the switch so often that English becomes the second option instead of the first. He studied me. You need to surround yourself with Japanese, all the time. Do you watch Japanese TV? I can't afford streaming services with Japanese content. Something flickered in his expression. You have a laptop? A 6-year-old one that barely runs. He made a note in his book. That's being resolved. Tomorrow, a package will arrive at your apartment. Don't refuse it. Kaido, this is an investment in my conversation partner's competency, he interrupted. If I want our sessions to be productive, you need proper resources. Accept it as a business expense. This isn't normal, I said, switching back to Japanese without meaning to, the language flowing more naturally now after 2 hours of forced practice. Men like you don't help people like me, he answered in Japanese, his tone gentler than I'd heard it. Men like me do exactly what they want, when they want, to whom they want. Right now, I want to teach you Japanese properly. Let me. At 8 o'clock, I returned to my normal duties, my brain fizzing with new grammar patterns and corrected pronunciations. Kaido remained at his table, ordering dinner and working on his laptop with the same focused intensity he'd brought to our lesson. I caught him watching me several times as I worked the floor, his expression thoughtful and unreadable. When my shift ended at 11, the Blacktown car was waiting. I got in without hesitation this time. Tomorrow is Sunday, Kaido said, as the car pulled into traffic. You're off work. We'll meet at my office at 2 o'clock. I'll text you the address. Your office. Why not here? Because at my office I have whiteboards, proper teaching materials, and no curious staff interrupting. He glanced at me. Unless you're uncomfortable with that. I should have been. Should have insisted on public spaces and clear boundaries. But the thought of a proper lesson, with visual aids and uninterrupted time, was too tempting. Okay, I agreed. 2 o'clock. The package arrived at noon on Sunday. A sleek laptop, top of the line, with a note explaining it had been preloaded with every Japanese learning resource I could possibly need. Streaming services, digital textbooks, audio programs, all under password-protected accounts that I suspected were somehow untraceable. I spent an hour feeling like I was in over my head before curiosity won, and I started exploring the resources. By 1:30, I'd bookmarked 15 different programs and was desperately trying not to calculate how much this technology cost. Kaido's office was in Midtown, a sleek glass tower with the kind of security that required ID verification and metal detectors. The receptionist was expecting me, directing me to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. I rode up to the 42nd floor alone, my reflection in the mirrored walls showing a woman in jeans and a clean sweater, looking drastically out of place. The elevator opened directly into a reception area decorated in minimalist Japanese aesthetics. Clean lines, natural wood, a single scroll painting on the wall. A woman in her 50s, severe and elegant, looked up from her desk. "Miss Carter, Mr. Sakamura is expecting you." She gestured toward a door. "Conference room B. Please go in." The conference room was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, and a table long enough to seat 20 people. Kaido stood at one end, writing Japanese characters on a whiteboard in rapid, practiced strokes. He'd traded his suit for casual clothes, dark jeans and a gray Henley that somehow looked as expensive as his formal wear. "You're early," he said without turning around. "Good. We have a lot to cover." What followed was the most intensive language lesson of my life. Kaido moved through grammar patterns with the focus of someone accustomed to teaching, explaining connections between concepts my apps had treated as separate. He made me write on the whiteboard, correcting my stroke order with physical guidance that was professional, but left my skin tingling where his hand had touched mine. 3 hours in, he called a break, ordering food from somewhere that delivered in sleek bento boxes that were probably more expensive than my weekly grocery budget. We ate while he asked about my scholarship application, the program details, my timeline. "The deadline is in 3 months," I explained in a mixture of Japanese and English, my brain too tired to stay in one language. "But I need to pass the N2 exam first, and the next testing date is in 6 weeks, and I don't think I'm ready." "You're not," he agreed bluntly. "Your reading and listening are close. Your grammar knowledge is adequate, but your speaking and writing need intensive work. 6 weeks is aggressive." Disappointment settled in my chest. "So I should wait for the next exam? That's in December, which means I'd miss this year's scholarship cycle." Kaido set down his chopsticks, considering me. "Or we accelerate your learning. 4 sessions per week instead of 2. I'll assign homework. You'll spend every spare moment immersed in Japanese until your brain stops reaching for English first." He paused. "It will be exhausting. You'll dream in Japanese and wake up confused about which language you're supposed to be thinking in. But it's possible." "Why are you doing this?" The question burst out before I could stop it. "You've given me money, a laptop, hours of your time. You're restructuring your schedule to teach me. What do you want, Kaido?" He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying me with that unreadable intensity. When he spoke, his voice was softer than I'd heard it. 5 years ago I was engaged. Her name was Emiko. She was beautiful, intelligent, from a good family. Everything my father wanted for me. He looked out the window at the city sprawling below us. She learned I was involved in the family business, not just the legitimate holdings, but the other aspects. She asked me to choose, her or the life I'd been born into. My throat went tight. "What did you choose?" "The family, the obligation." His jaw tightened. "She died 6 months later. Car accident, supposedly. But I've always suspected it was connected to my world, to people who wanted to hurt me through her." He turned back to me. "Since then, I've kept my distance from people outside the business. It's safer, cleaner. Then why?" Because you're trying to build something for yourself through your own effort. Because you cursed at me in Japanese and then looked terrified and defiant all at once. Because you interest me in a way nothing has in years. His gaze locked with mine. I'm not promising this is simple. I'm not promising it's safe. But I'm offering you the help you need, because I can, and because I want to. If that's not enough, tell me now and we end this. I should have walked away. Should have recognized the danger in getting closer to someone like him. But sitting in that conference room, looking at a man who'd just shown me a glimpse of his humanity beneath the power and control, I couldn't find it in me to refuse. 4 sessions a week, I said, but I pay for my own rent from now on. The laptop and the lessons are already more than I can justify. Something like approval flickered in his expression. Agreed. The money was a one-time bridge. You're capable of supporting yourself. I won't insult you by suggesting otherwise. He started to turn back to the whiteboard, but I stopped him with a hand on his arm. Kaido, thank you. Really. His hand covered mine briefly, the touch warm and deliberate. Don't thank me yet. This is going to be harder than anything you've attempted before. He was right. 4 weeks into our arrangement, I was dreaming in Japanese and forgetting English words in the middle of conversations with Tommy. My body operated on autopilot during my shifts at Kanemoto's. My mind constantly half-focused on the vocabulary list I was reviewing in my head, or the grammar pattern Kaido had introduced during our last session. I'd lost 5 pounds I couldn't afford to lose because I kept forgetting to eat anything more substantial than the meals Kaido ordered during our lessons. I was exhausted. Wired. More alive than I'd been in months. The scholarship application was almost complete. My mock exam scores had jumped from barely passing to solidly intermediate. Kaido had arranged for me to take a practice test with actual JLPT-certified proctors, an experience that had been terrifying and exhilarating and had shown me exactly where my remaining weaknesses were. But something else was shifting too. Something I was actively trying not to examine. It was in the way Kaido's hand would linger on my shoulder when he was demonstrating proper writing posture, the way his eyes would track me across the bar floor during my shifts, a constant warm weight of attention that I felt even when I wasn't looking at him. The way he'd started asking about my life beyond Japanese. My family, distant. My dreams, vague. The things that made me happy, increasingly difficult to answer. We'd developed a routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays at Kanemoto's, 2-hour sessions in the VIP section before my shift started. Saturdays at his office, intensive 4-hour blocks with breakfast and lunch included. And now Sundays. He'd added Sundays 2 weeks ago. Casual sessions at a cafe in the village that he apparently owned, where we'd practice conversational Japanese while pretending not to notice the way the baristas watched us with obvious curiosity. It was at that cafe, on a Sunday in early December, that everything tilted. We were practicing keigo, formal Japanese, the kind required for business situations. I was butchering it, mixing up the levels of politeness in a way that made Kaido laugh, an actual full laugh I'd only heard a handful of times. "Stop," he said in English, still grinning. "You're giving honorific language to yourself. That's like calling yourself Your Majesty. Try again." I did, messing it up in a completely different way that made him laugh harder. "I hate keigo," I muttered in Japanese. "Why does one language need 17 ways to say the same thing?" "Context," he replied, still in Japanese. "Every language reveals cultural priorities. English prioritizes efficiency. Japanese prioritizes relationship. Every interaction requires acknowledging your social position relative to others." That sounds exhausting. It is. He took a sip of his coffee, his expression growing more serious. "It's also isolating when you're at the top. There's no one to speak casually to except family. And family comes with its own complications." I thought about the photograph in his office. the one I'd noticed during our sessions, showing Kaito with an older man who shared his features. Your father? Was. Past tense. He died 3 years ago. Heart attack, officially. Stress, realistically. His voice was even, but I'd learned to read the micro-expressions he couldn't quite control. He built everything I've inherited, the legitimate businesses, the other operations, the network of obligations and loyalties that define my life. Most days I'm still trying to figure out if I'm running an empire or being run by it. You could walk away, I said quietly. Sell everything. Start over. No. The word was flat, final. The kind of obligations I have aren't discharged by a corporate sale. They're blood ties, honor debts, the weight of being your father's son in a culture where that means something permanent. He looked at me. Your culture prioritizes individualism. The idea that you can reinvent yourself, shed your past, become whoever you choose. My culture doesn't work that way. What you're born into defines you. Walking away from that isn't freedom. It's dishonor. The sadness in his voice was understated but present, a note of resignation that made my chest ache. I'm sorry, I said in Japanese, because English felt wrong for this moment. Don't be. He switched to Japanese too, the conversation taking on an intimacy that the language shift created. I've made peace with who I am, what I do, the line I walk between the legitimate world and the shadow world. Most days I even take pride in it. And the other days I wonder what it would be like to be someone else. Someone who could sit in a cafe with a woman and not have 3 security personnel positioned around the perimeter. Someone who could be interested in someone without calculating the risk to their safety. My breath caught. Kaito. I'm interested in you, Lena. He said it in English now, the words direct and unambiguous. This stopped being just about Japanese lessons weeks ago, and we both know it. I stared at him, my heart hammering. This is a terrible idea. Undoubtedly. You're dangerous. Your world is dangerous. True. I'm leaving. The scholarship, if I get it, I'll be in Japan for a year. Maybe longer if I can arrange university admission after. I know. Then why? Because dangerous doesn't mean impossible. Because leaving means you're going somewhere, not disappearing. Because maybe... He paused, his expression vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. Because maybe I'm tired of keeping everyone at a distance for their own protection and mine. I should have said no. Should have reminded him of all the reasons this was impossible. Our different worlds, the temporary nature of any relationship we could have, the danger of his life bleeding into mine. Instead, I reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers closed around mine, warm and certain, and something shifted in the air between us. Not just attraction, though that was there, had been there since that first night, when he'd tilted his head and told me to curse properly, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The sense of 2 people who'd been isolated in different ways, finding unexpected understanding. This doesn't mean I'm not scared, I said quietly. It would be stupid not to be scared. His thumb traced patterns on the back of my hand. But I'll protect you. That's not negotiable. Anyone who comes near you with intent to harm will learn exactly what I'm capable of. The casual certainty with which he said it should have been frightening. It was. But it was also, in some complicated way, comforting. We stayed like that for a long moment, hands linked across the cafe table, while around us, people lived their normal lives unaware of the shift that had just occurred in ours. That evening, Kaito's driver took us to a restaurant in Tribeca that I'd seen featured in magazines but never imagined entering. The maitre d' greeted Kaito by name, led us to a private dining room that overlooked the city lights, and departed with the kind of discretion that suggested he'd been trained to notice nothing. This is too much, I said, as a server poured wine I definitely couldn't pronounce. I can't. Lena. Kaido's voice was gentle. I'm not trying to overwhelm you, but this is my life. If we're doing this, whatever this becomes, you need to see what that means. The resources, yes, but also the constraints. The eyes always watching. The calculations behind every public appearance. As if on cue, the door opened, and a Japanese man in an expensive suit entered without knocking. He was older than Kaido, maybe early 50s, with the hard look of someone who'd lived through violence and come out the other side. Takeshi, Kaido said, his tone cooling several degrees. I thought we agreed you'd call before visiting. Forgive the intrusion, Kaito-san. Takeshi's eyes flicked to me, assessing and dismissing in a heartbeat. But we have a situation. Matsu has been making moves in the dockyard territory. He's claiming breach of agreement. Not here, Kaido said, his voice hard. And not now. It's urgent. Then it can wait 30 minutes. Steel entered Kaito's tone. I'm having dinner with Lena. You'll wait in the main dining room. Order whatever you want, and I'll join you when we're finished. Takeshi's expression flickered. Surprise, then calculation, then something like understanding. He bowed slightly. Of course, my apologies, miss. He departed, closing the door softly behind him. Kaido's jaw was tight, his hands fisted on the table. I reached over and covered one with my own. It's fine, I said in Japanese. Your work is important. My work is never ending. It will always interrupt, always demand attention. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with mine. This is what I meant about constraints. There's no version of my life that includes normal dates or unscheduled weekends or not having someone like Takeshi appearing at inconvenient moments. I understand. Do you? He studied me. Really, because this is the easy part. Wait until someone decides you're a weakness to exploit. Wait until you understand exactly what I'm willing to do to protect what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have been a red flag. It probably was. But sitting there, looking at a man who was trying to warn me away while simultaneously holding my hand like he never wanted to let go, I found I didn't care about the warnings. Then protect me, I said simply, and let me decide if I can handle it. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, determination, a flash of heat that made my breath catch. Finish your dinner, he said, his voice low. Then I need to deal with Matsu. But after, he paused. After, we're going to have a very direct conversation about expectations and boundaries and what this actually means. We ate quickly, the tension between us electric and unspoken. Kaido barely tasted his food, his attention constantly flickering between me and the door where Takeshi waited. When we finished, he walked me out to his car, his hand at the small of my back proprietary and warm. My driver will take you home, he said. Tomorrow your shift ends at 9. We'll talk then. About what? He leaned in, his lips close to my ear. About the fact that I'm done pretending this is just language lessons. About what it means to be with someone like me. About whether you're actually ready for that. He pulled back before I could respond, his expression already shifting into the cold mask I recognized as his business face. He turned toward the restaurant where Takeshi waited, his posture changing, becoming something more dangerous. I watched him go, my heart hammering, before climbing into the town car. The drive home felt longer than usual, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Let myself fall into something complicated and dangerous with a man who'd been perfectly clear about the risks. And the terrifying part? I wanted it anyway. My phone buzzed as the car pulled up to my building. A text from Kaido in Japanese. Sleep well. Tomorrow, everything changes. I stared at the message, then typed back. I'm ready. It was only partially a lie. The change came not with a bang, but with a man standing outside Kanemoto's when I arrived for my shift on Monday. He was Japanese, early 30s, with the kind of face that was forgettable by design. He wore a dark suit that blended into the urban landscape, and he fell into step beside me as I approached the employee entrance with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this before. "Miss Carter," he said in lightly accented English. "My name is Sato. Sakamura-san has assigned me to your security detail, effective immediately." I stopped walking, my heart rate spiking. "Security detail?" Discreet observation. "You won't notice me most of the time, but I'll be present whenever you're in public." His expression was professional, neutral. Sakamura-san felt it was necessary after last night's development with the Matsu situation. What development? That's not my information to share, but he'll explain when you see him this evening. Sato bowed slightly. "I'll be outside during your shift. If you need to leave the building for any reason, please let me know first." He walked away before I could formulate a response, disappearing into the foot traffic with the ease of someone trained to be invisible. I entered Kanemoto's in a daze, my mind trying to process what having security meant. Kaido had mentioned protection. I'd imagined it as abstract, the weight of his influence, his name keeping threats at bay. Not an actual person watching my movements. Mariko took one look at my face and pulled me into her office. "What happened?" she demanded. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Kaido assigned me a bodyguard." The word sounded absurd out loud. "Someone named Sato. He's outside right now." Mariko's expression went through several changes: surprise, understanding, concern. "So it's progressed to that point." "What point?" "The point where you're officially under his protection. Where everyone in his world knows you're his." She sat down heavily. "Lena, do you understand what that means?" He explained some of it. "No," Mariko interrupted. "You don't understand. I've worked in this neighborhood for 20 years. I've seen how the Sakamura family operates. When someone becomes theirs, they're guarded like treasure, protected absolutely, but they're also claimed, marked as belonging to the family in ways that can't be undone." My throat went tight. "You're saying I made a mistake. I'm saying you made a choice, and now you live with the consequences, whatever those are." She studied me. "Do you have feelings for him?" I thought about Kaido's hand in mine, his careful explanations of a world I didn't understand, the way he looked at me like I was something precious and dangerous all at once. "Yes," I admitted quietly. "Then I hope he's worth it." She squeezed my shoulder. "Because once you're in that world, Lena, getting out is nearly impossible." The shift passed in a blur. I caught glimpses of Sato through the windows, sometimes standing across the street, sometimes sitting in a parked car, always watching. Other customers noticed him too, though they couldn't have known he was there for me. Just another piece of the neighborhood's complicated security landscape. At 8:30, Kaido arrived, not alone this time. He was accompanied by Takeshi and 2 other men I didn't recognize, all moving with the coordinated awareness of people trained to assess threats. They took the VIP section, and Mariko gestured for me to serve them. Kaido's eyes found mine immediately, holding my gaze for a beat longer than necessary. "Lena, join us for a moment." It wasn't a request. I sat in the chair he pulled out, acutely aware of the other men watching me with varying degrees of curiosity and assessment. "I apologize for the security measures," Kaido said in English, his tone formal in a way that suggested this was for the benefit of his associates. "But circumstances have made them necessary. Matsu has made threats, not directly against you, but implied. I'm not taking chances." "What kind of threats?" I asked. "The kind that suggest he's researched my vulnerabilities." Kaido's jaw tightened. "He knows you're important to me. That makes you a target." One of the other men, younger, with sharp eyes and an assessing expression, spoke in rapid Japanese. I caught enough to understand he was questioning the wisdom of involving an outsider in their business affairs. Kaido responded in Japanese, his tone hard and unarguable. I translated mentally. She's mine. That's not negotiable. Any threat to her is treated as a threat to me directly. The younger man's expression shifted to something like respect mixed with wariness. He bowed slightly, an acknowledgement of Kaido's authority. Your shift ends at 9, Kaido continued in English, his attention back on me. We'll talk privately after. There are things you need to know about the situation. I nodded, understanding I was being dismissed. As I stood, Kaido's hand caught mine briefly, a touch that was warm and grounding before he released me. The hour until my shift ended felt eternal. I watched Kaido conduct what was clearly business. Papers spread across the table, low voices speaking in Japanese too rapid for me to follow, the occasional sharp gesture that suggested disagreement. Takeshi looked unhappy about something. The younger man kept glancing at me with undisguised curiosity. At 9 precisely, Kaido stood, said something to his associates, and walked toward me as I was hanging up my apron. Come, he said simply. I followed him out to where the black town car waited. Sato materialized from wherever he'd been positioned, speaking briefly to Kaido in Japanese before departing. The driver held the door, and I slid into the familiar leather interior. Kaido climbed in beside me, and the divider rose, cocooning us in privacy. I need you to understand the situation, he said without preamble. Matsu operates gambling and protection rackets in areas adjacent to my territories. We've had an understanding, clear boundaries, no encroachment. Last week he started making moves that violate that understanding. And that involves me how? Because when I pushed back, he made it clear he'd researched me, mentioned that I'd been spending time with a pretty American girl who works at Kanemoto's. Kaido's voice went flat. That's not casual observation. That's targeted intelligence gathering. He's looking for leverage. Fear spiked through me. What does he want? Control. Territory. Probably to test whether I'm weakened by having someone I care about. He turned to face me fully. I need you to understand what this means, Lena. From now on, Sato or one of my other people will be with you whenever you're in public. You don't go anywhere without letting me know first. Your apartment building will have additional security. Your routine will be monitored. That sounds like a prison. It's protection. There's a difference. His hand found mine. I'm not restricting your freedom. I'm ensuring your safety. For how long? Until Matsu backs down, or is made to back down. His tone made clear what that second option entailed. It shouldn't be more than a few weeks. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, trying to process what my life had become. 4 weeks ago, I was a struggling server with a dream of studying abroad. Now I had a bodyguard, a powerful man claiming ownership of my safety, and enemies I'd never met who viewed me as a weakness to exploit. This is insane, I whispered. Yes. Kaido's agreement was blunt. And I'm sorry. If I could keep you completely separate from this part of my life, I would. But that's not possible anymore. Because I'm important to you. I repeated his words from earlier. Because you're mine. The correction was soft but absolute. I tried to fight that. Tried to keep this at a professional distance. But somewhere between your terrible pronunciation and your determination to learn, despite having every reason to give up, I stopped being able to maintain that distance. I looked at him, this dangerous, complicated man who'd somehow become central to my life in the span of a month. What does yours mean in your world? It means I protect you absolutely. It means anyone who threatens you answers to me. It means your well-being becomes one of my primary concerns. He paused. It also means you don't get to walk away easily. Once you're mine in my world, That's not a temporary designation. That's possessive. Yes. He didn't apologize for it. Is that a problem? I should have said yes. Should have recognized the red flags waving urgently in my peripheral vision. But sitting there, looking at the genuine concern in his expression, mixed with that unapologetic claim of ownership, I found I couldn't. No, I admitted. It should be, but it's not. Something heated in his gaze. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone with deliberate slowness. I want to kiss you. Have wanted to for weeks. But once I do, there's no going back. This becomes real in a way that changes everything. My heart hammered against my ribs. Maybe I want it to be real. He leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away. I didn't. His lips met mine with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of his earlier words, a soft exploration that made my breath catch. I kissed him back, my hands finding his shoulders, and felt the careful control in how he held me, like I was something precious he was afraid of breaking. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, his forehead rested against mine. No going back, he murmured in Japanese. No going back, I agreed in the same language. The car pulled up outside my building, where I now noticed 2 additional men I didn't recognize positioned near the entrance, their bearing marking them as Kaido's people. Tomorrow, Kaido said, we'll talk about the scholarship, about what happens if you get it, about how this... He gestured between us. Factors into your plans. I'm still going, I said immediately. If I get it, I'm still going to Japan. Something flickered in his expression. I know. I wouldn't ask you to give up your dream. But we need to figure out what that means for us. I climbed out of the car, my lips still tingling from the kiss, my mind spinning with everything that had changed in one evening. As I walked toward my building, Sato appeared from wherever he'd been stationed. Good night, Miss Carter, he said quietly. I'll be here until the night team arrives. I nodded, still trying to adjust to this new reality. Inside my apartment, I collapsed on the couch and pulled out my phone. There was a text from Kaido, sent while I'd been walking upstairs. You handled tonight with more grace than I expected. Most people would have run. Thank you for staying. I typed back. Where would I run to that you wouldn't find me? His response came immediately. Nowhere. But I appreciate you not making me chase you. I set the phone down, my mind replaying the kiss, the conversation, the casual way he'd talked about protection and possession like they were the same thing. I was in so far over my head. And the terrifying part? I didn't want to surface. 3 weeks later, I sat in a small testing room at the Japan Foundation, staring at the final page of the N2 exam. My hand cramped from writing, my brain felt like it had been wrung dry, and I couldn't tell if I'd passed or completely bombed. The proctor called time, and I set down my pencil with shaking hands. Kaido was waiting in the lobby, sitting with the perfect posture that marked him even in civilian clothes. Dark jeans and a black sweater that somehow looked as expensive as his suits. He stood when he saw me, his expression revealing nothing. How was it? He asked in Japanese. I don't know. I answered in the same language, my brain too fried to switch back to English. I won't know for 6 weeks. You passed. He said it with certainty, taking my bag and slinging it over his shoulder. I can see it in your posture. You're relieved, not defeated. Outside, Sato waited by the car, his presence now so familiar I barely registered it. The past 3 weeks had been intense. Escalating tension with Matsu that had required increased security, interrupted dates when Kaido was pulled into business emergencies, and one terrifying evening when someone had tried to follow me home, and Sato had intervened with efficiency that suggested he'd done this before. But through it all, Kaido had been constant. Present when he could be, checking in when he couldn't, teaching me Japanese with the same fierce intensity he brought to everything else. My speaking had improved dramatically, less from textbooks, and more from the hours we'd spent having real conversations in Japanese about everything from his family history to my childhood in Michigan. We'd grown closer in ways I was still trying to process. Not just physically, though there had been more kisses, more touches, more moments when the air between us felt charged with possibility, but emotionally, he'd told me about Emiko, about the guilt he carried. I'd told him about my mother's death when I was 17, about feeling like I'd been treading water ever since. We'd shared the complicated parts of ourselves that usually stayed hidden. And now, the scholarship decision was due in 2 days. "I need to tell you something," Kaito said as the car pulled into traffic. His tone was serious, careful in a way that made my stomach clench. "What?" "The Matsu situation has resolved." He kept his eyes forward. "Permanently." I understood what permanently meant in his world. "Did you?" "No." "He tried to make a move against one of my operations. My people defended it. He didn't survive the encounter." His jaw was tight. "It wasn't what I wanted, but it's done." I should have been horrified, should have recoiled from the casual confirmation of violence. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of relief and guilt. Relief that the threat was gone, guilt that I felt relieved. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly. He looked at me then, surprise flickering in his expression. "You're asking if I'm okay?" "Yes." Something softened in his face. He reached for my hand, lacing our fingers together. "Most people would be focused on their own safety, on what this says about me. I already know what it says about you. You protect what's yours." I squeezed his hand. "But that doesn't mean it's easy." "No." He looked down at our joined hands. "It's not." We rode in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "The scholarship. If you get it, when you get it, I have a proposal." My heart skipped. "What kind of proposal?" "My company has operations in Tokyo, significant ones. I spend about 4 months a year there, overseeing things personally." He turned to face me fully. "What if, when you go to Japan, I arrange for my schedule to align with yours? I'll be in Tokyo for your first few months, helping you settle, making sure you're safe." "Kaito, that's..." "Selfish," he interrupted. "Completely selfish. Because I don't want you halfway around the world without me. But it's also practical. You'll need help navigating Japanese culture beyond what textbooks teach. You'll need someone who can run interference if issues arise with housing or school bureaucracy. And you'll need..." He paused. "You'll need me." The blunt honesty of it took my breath away. "What about your work here?" "Takeshi can handle things for a few months. He's been pushing for more responsibility anyway. And I have people I trust to manage the day-to-day operations." His thumb traced patterns on my hand. "This is me trying to figure out how to keep you in my life while not asking you to give up your dream." "You'd really reorganize your entire life around my scholarship?" "Yes." No hesitation. "Because you're mine, Lena. That means supporting what matters to you. And this matters to you." I stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. Not a cage, despite the possessiveness. Not control for its own sake. But an attempt to bridge our two worlds in a way that honored both. "What if I say no?" I asked quietly. "What if I want to do this alone?" "Then I respect that. I'll stay here, and we'll figure out how to maintain something across distance." His expression was serious. "But I'll still have people watching you, making sure you're safe. That's not negotiable." "Of course it's not." But I was smiling despite myself. "Is that a yes to my proposal?" he asked. I thought about what it would mean, having Kaito in Tokyo, his presence both comforting and complicated. The way having him there would change my experience, probably make it safer, but also tie me more deeply to his world. But I also thought about the past month. How he'd taught me Japanese with tireless patience. How he'd protected me without making me feel helpless. How he'd somehow managed to be possessive and supportive in equal measure. "Yes," I said finally, "but on one condition." "Name it." "You teach me the Japanese I'll need to navigate your world. The formal language, the cultural codes, all of it. Because if I'm going to be yours in Japan, I need to understand what that means there." Something like pride flashed in his eyes. "Deal." The scholarship notification arrived on Thursday morning. I was at Kanemoto's, restocking supplies before the evening shift, when my phone buzzed with an email that made my heart stop. "Dear Ms. Carter, we are pleased to inform you." I read it 3 times, my hands shaking, before the reality sank in. I'd gotten it. A full year in Japan, tuition covered, stipend for living expenses, placement at a university in Tokyo. I'd actually gotten it. I called Kaido immediately, not thinking about whether he was in a meeting or otherwise occupied. He answered on the second ring. "Lena?" "I got it." My voice broke. "I got the scholarship." Silence. Then quietly. "Of course you did." "Kaido, I got it. I'm going to Japan." "We're going to Japan," he corrected. "Together." "Congratulations, Lena. You earned this." The emotion in his voice matched mine. Pride, excitement, something deeper that neither of us had quite named yet. That evening, he showed up at Kanemoto's with flowers, understated, elegant, expensive. Mariko raised her eyebrows when she saw them, but said nothing as Kaido pulled me into a kiss right there in the main dining room, in front of customers and staff and anyone else who cared to watch. "I'm proud of you," he said in Japanese, loud enough for others to hear. The declaration public, deliberate. "Thank you for making it possible," I replied in the same language. My pronunciation perfect, because he'd corrected it 100 times until I got it right. 2 months later, I stood in the arrival terminal of Narita Airport, exhausted from the 13-hour flight, but thrumming with anticipation. Kaido had taken a different flight. Business reasons, separation of our arrivals that apparently mattered in his world. But I knew he was already in Tokyo, waiting. My phone buzzed with a text in Japanese. "Welcome home. My driver is outside arrivals. Look for the black Mercedes." Home, he'd written. Not just Tokyo, not just Japan. Home. I found the car, climbed into the familiar leather interior that smelled like cedar and citrus. But this time, when I looked up, Kaido was there in the back seat, wearing a suit that looked different against the Tokyo skyline visible through the windows. More natural, somehow. More himself. "Lena," he said. My name a greeting and a claim all at once. I slid across the seat and kissed him, pouring everything I felt into it. Gratitude, affection, the strange aching certainty that somewhere in the past 3 months, this dangerous man had become essential to me. When we pulled apart, he kept his hand on my face, thumb tracing my cheek. "I have something for you," he said in Japanese. He handed me a small box. Inside was a key on a simple chain, elegant and substantial. "To what?" I asked. "My apartment, here in Tokyo." He watched my reaction carefully. "I'm not assuming you'll live with me. You have your student housing, and I respect that. But I want you to have access, to know you can come to me whenever you need to." I turned the key over in my hand, understanding what it represented. Not just access to a physical space, but to him. To the life he lived in Japan, more fully than he could in New York. "Thank you," I said softly. He replied. "No. It's me who should thank you. For letting me be part of this, for trusting me, despite every reason not to." I thought about the night I'd cursed in Japanese, and he'd tilted his head with that mix of amusement and interest. How that single moment had unraveled into this. Sitting in Tokyo beside a man who'd somehow become mine as much as I'd become his. "So, what now?" I asked. Kaido smiled, the expression transforming his face into something younger, freer. "Now you go to your orientation tomorrow. You start your classes next week, and I teach you how to navigate Tokyo, how to read the cultural codes, how to exist in my world when you need to, and your own world when you want to. And us? We figure it out as we go." He laced his fingers with mine. "No promises except that I'll protect you, support your goals, and be honest about what I can offer." "What about love?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. His expression grew serious. "In my culture, love isn't declared easily. It's demonstrated through action, through commitment, through time." He paused. "But if you're asking if I feel something for you that goes beyond simple interest or protection, the answer is yes. Absolutely yes." It wasn't exactly a declaration, but coming from Kaido, it was enough. "Then let's figure it out as we go," I agreed. The car pulled away from the airport, merging into Tokyo traffic as the city sprawled before us. Massive, overwhelming, full of possibility. I'd come here for a scholarship, for a dream of studying language and culture. But somewhere along the way, I'd found something I hadn't been looking for. Something complicated and dangerous, and more real than anything I'd experienced before. Kaido's hand stayed in mine as we drove, his thumb tracing familiar patterns. While outside the window, Tokyo glittered like a promise. Our promise. Our beginning. And for the first time in months, I wasn't looking backward at what I'd lost, or forward at what I feared. I was present, here, in this moment with this man, building something new from 2 languages, 2 worlds, 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way. "Aishiteru," I whispered in Japanese, the phrase for "I love you" that was rarely used, saved for moments of deep sincerity. Kaido turned to me, surprise and warmth flooding his expression. "Oremo," he replied. "Me too." And as Tokyo welcomed us both, I knew, whatever came next, whatever challenges his world brought, whatever complications arose, we'd face it together. In 2 languages, in 2 worlds. Bound by something that had started with a curse and become something infinitely more precious